approach that's equally valuable.
I'm Freddie Knight.
And I'm Damon Patterson.
And this is the KC Dev Report. And episode 11, we are discussing part 2 of the development of 71 Highway. And we decided to do this in 2 parts for 2 different reasons. One, there's just a lot of information about it. And second, we wanted to get some input from you all on what you thought about the development of 71 Highway. And we did get some input, and we're very excited. We're going to share that tonight.
We had some good feedback.
It was really good feedback. I was kind of excited. I could go into that for a long time.
Yeah, it was a few surprises there, a few statements that kind of surprised me a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
I didn't think of it like that.
Right. And 71 Highway is just full of surprises in general, I think. With the research that you did, Damon, I just am really interested in some of the things that came out with that. So we're excited to share this with you. We did share some of this last week, and we may have a couple of repeat things, but it's such important information that we feel like it's good to share it again. So
we chose 71 Highway, which is also called Bruce R. Watkins Drive. The show, for some of you that are just joining us, we choose past, present, and future developments in and around Kansas City. And again, we're not developers. We're just 2 people who love Kansas City, and we're interested in development, and we like to dissect it and understand how things come to be and share it. So that's what the show is about in essence. And this is our first past show, or it's the first time we did a show about something that happened already in the past. And we chose 71 because it is a huge development that anybody in Kansas City knows about 71. And 71 Highway has a lot of layers to it. So it was a really interesting topic to choose for the podcast.
Yeah, I think it's a great topic, and I agree with you, Damon. Just like how this show goes for us and what we're interested in, and trying to, some of the development projects really have a big impact on the city in a big way, and some have a smaller impact. Definitely 71 Highway had a huge impact on Kansas City in a lot of layers, right? In a lot of different,
and still does,
different ways. As we found out from those who gave us comments about what you thought about 71 Highway, there's layers in that too. So we know it's a pretty deep subject to say. So let's just cover a little bit of the history. So when did 71 Highway? I mean, it's a huge timeline, right? So when did it first get conceived? And
so discussions
built?
For a South Kansas City highway to connect to downtown began in the 50s.
Wow.
So that makes it a 50-year project, which is a long time for development. For a road.
Right.
Highway.
Right. And so why did it get, what was the initial purpose? Why did it come into existence? Who was behind it?
So funny. Now that was some really interesting stuff. So on June 29th, 1956, President Eisenhower signed a bill into law, which was the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. Now, this was really interesting to me. It was also known as the National Interstate and Defense Highway Act. So, in essence, The highway was about connecting bases. It was making sure that the military had access to the bases around the country, and it was a part of a larger development that took place across the entire United States. The bill authorized $25 billion for the construction of 41,000 miles of an interstate highway system. So 71 is a part of that system, which was really about the military,
Right.
and everyday people just can use it too.
Yeah, yeah. And like I told you last week, my husband Hubert had said that he knew it was Eisenhower was very much about looking at what Germany had in their highway system,
Right.
and he wanted to have that highway system for us to move the military around. But I think also just that, like, gosh, they have great highways. Why don't we have great highways?
Yeah.
So 71 Highway was actually funded 90% of it from the federal government. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
90%
So
of it
was
was from the government, and then the cities were responsible for 10%. And overall, 71 was $300 million to complete. That's how much it cost.
You know, when something like that kind of development, what I've learned in the last few years of when these kind of developments, I wonder if they did an environmental impact study.
Probably not.
Probably not, because if they had, they would have not. It wouldn't have taken how long? How many years did this take to build?
50 years.
50 years. That's just
Yeah.
insanity, right?
Yeah.
But the reason is because they didn't do their homework. They didn't ask the community like they should, and they got some problems in the process.
Yeah, so the development actually took a lot longer because it was actually held up in litigation. So the community, a lot of different people from the community, different non-for-profits and organizations came together and made their voice heard about the highway. That people were not happy about the highway, and they did delay it for a really long time. And part of that litigation, what came out of it, is the reason that we have, because many people, the stoplights are very controversial,
Right.
even to this day.
Right.
And the reason that those stops are there because it was part of the compromise when it was being litigated. Part of the compromise was to have those stops, and then that south stretch of the highway, which is I think it's Gregory. So it's like Gregory, 75th, Meyer, 63rd, 59th, 55th. They actually downgraded it from highway to more of a parkway. So that's why you have that speed limit change, and then it turns back into a highway.
Right.
But part of it, the reason it took so long is because they had to come to those compromises.
Which is interesting because, like, I'm not from Kansas City, so when I moved here and started taking 71 Highway, I was like, it was irritating, to be honest. I'm like, this is a highway? Is this really a highway? What is this thing? And so from an outsider perspective, it was irritating. I know people inside, but the compromise was because it was devastating the neighborhoods along 71 Highway. That was the part, that was the environmental impact study they didn't do. That was not coming to the community to find out what's this going to do to the community by putting this highway in. And it was absolutely a problem for many of the businesses, the neighborhoods that surrounded it. And so they came out in force, really, to say that was going to destroy their neighborhood. And it did destroy it in the north end. I mean, it still did on the south, but even more so up north when they just pushed through with it. And it's I don't know that people know this, Damon. I don't know. It'd just be interesting to know how many people in Kansas City really know the reason why that you have a parkway on the south part and a highway on the north part. I bet you a lot of people don't know that was the reason.
I didn't know.
I didn't know.
Till I started reading about it.
But yeah, and that'd be a new poll that we should maybe do next
How many
is just
people
how
know
many
why?
people know why it took 50 years, why it's half parkway with stoplights and half highway up the north. I just think people don't know.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say too that as a urban realtor, as I am studying more and more about dividing lines in different cities, and here in Kansas City, we did that poll this week too. But it's I don't think it was an intentional, but the unintentional consequences of the 71 highway did divide the city into, it put in another dividing line. There was already the truce dividing line happening, but this was an additional dividing line between the east side majority black and the white side majority white on the west side of truce, so, or west side of Highway 71. And in addition, how many houses were taken out?
So
To
the
build this thing.
numbers that I found was 10,000. We don't know if that is a completely accurate number, but it's 10,000 homes, and I'm sure that doesn't include the businesses,
Mm-hmm.
that were pretty much just devastated, and walls were created, and property value was affected.
Yes,
Because again, people don't like to live near highways
correct.
for many reasons: noise pollution, smog, all sorts of things that and that blank, void, vacant lots that it created. People don't like highways for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Also, speaking of that, another fun thing I found, which we did talk about when you say was it intentional or was it unintentional, was the first route that they were deciding on when they were deciding where to put the highway was actually Brookside.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So, and then they decided to not put it in Brookside because it was cheaper to put it on the east side. So some of it was intentional,
Yeah.
or still intentional and unintentional. So it was intentional for it to be cheaper, but how that affects the people and where it ended up being, I think they didn't care.
They didn't
in the
care,
end.
right.
It was like, well, this is what we want. This is what needs to happen. This is what we're going to do. We'll figure out the damage later.
Right.
I think that's kind of the attitude in many developments.
Right. So this was actually the reason, again, it took 50 years is there was community neighborhood pushback, mostly from the black community. Bruce Watkins, which it's named after, he was one of our first black city councilmen, is that right?
Yep.
And the co-founder of Freedom Inc., which is a political action group, and he opposed it. He's no longer alive. I would love to ask him more about this, but he opposed it, but they went ahead and named the highway after him, which
That's
is
pretty
just
funny.
kind of funny or bizarre, or I don't know. It's very interesting.
So speaking of other names, one of the representatives that came up is Mamie Hughes, and the bridge that crosses 71 at Meyer Boulevard is actually named after her.
Mm-hmm.
So she was a community representative, and she was going out and educating people about their property rights and advocated for the bridges and lower speeds and street lights.
Yeah, that bridge is beautiful
Yeah.
too. By the way, if you not taken time to, as you're driving down 71 highway and see, you probably see her name, but the bridge itself is absolutely a very pretty. It's really in the Seville Plaza style. I like that about that bridge. So they did that right, I guess. But it was actually 1985 was the court settled. They finally did the settlement in court. So this was in and out of court. So very, very thick with lots of controversy and lawsuits and so forth. So we don't have enough time to go into all of that, but just know it was very contested and went into court. And so and that the compromise is what we have today, that everybody like myself gets irritated with the stop sign, but now I'm not so irritated. I just have to tell you, now I'm like, okay, I get it now.
Yeah,
But,
that's if
yeah.
you really think about that, like 1950s, and it wasn't complete till 2001. That's crazy.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
And we're going to get to some of you gave us some comments. Somebody made a comment that I can't wait to tell you about that. Just like how, I mean, can you imagine? I mean, living alongside this, just empty fields and they tore all the houses down, but they didn't get it built. So you just have nothing but
Yeah.
desolation, basically.
When I was a teenager, I lived on 50th and Chestnut, and we moved a lot when I was young. So we kind of lived around that area a lot, but not knowing what that was before it was done, it really was just vacant lots that just sat there for years. And I always thought too, after I learned and after 71, was complete, I thought like, wow, people could have been still living in their houses
Right.
for a very long time.
Right.
That was just something that kind of
Yeah.
crossed my mind, like, wow.
Yeah.
Because it literally just sat there vacant for a
10,000
very long
houses.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, it's I hope everybody that's listened to this now, or maybe you listen to it on the recording later. But we're doing this as a podcast too, so you can always go download the podcast from any of your wherever you go listen to podcasts. But I just hope everybody kind of takes this in and really thinks about this, because I'm sure all of you at some point in the near future will be on 71 Highway and be going, oh, the slowdowns. But maybe now it'll give you pause to think, okay, what really happened here? And I'll tell you, if you study, I'm studying more than just Kansas City when it comes to urban development and dividing lines and how highways are something that has been done. It's not just in Kansas City. It's happened in a lot of other cities, not just highways. But that's another topic. But I just hope that people will take some time and think about what does that really mean to us as a community, and not just being irritated at a stop sign. Is that a lot to ask? Is that a lot to ask?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so anything else we want to share that is from the Damon has a lot of fun facts here. Also, by the way, the little notes that we are looking at, these are available on our website, the kcdevreport.com. You can download these so that we don't get to everything, run out of time. Damon has a lot of fun facts on here that you can go take a look at. So go to our website and go to episode either 10 or 11, and the show notes will be there for you to take a look at. Any last fun fact you want to throw out there?
Fun facts. Let's see. So Wisconsin was the first state in the U.S. to use the number system.
For the highways,
For
right?
the highway.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
funny. Even numbers go east and west. I was really just digging in the highways. It got crazy, like learning about the grid. Numbers decreasing, increasing east and west, and just the naming system.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that number system, most of the highways and streets just had names.
That's interesting.
And then they actually created organizations to rename them. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that is very interesting.
But there's a lot of stuff here in the show notes. So like she said, any of the shows where you want to kind of dig a little deeper into things that we may not have touched, you can always go to the website at thekcdevreport.com, and any of the past shows that we've done, we have show notes there that you can read or download.
Yes.
You want to tag it to some of the responses we got?
Yeah, before we end this, we just wanted that we appreciate, we put out a call for y'all to give us some like your thoughts about 71 Highway, and you did. We got quite a few, and we're very excited. So we just want to highlight some of those and share with you what we did get from people. So the first one I want to bring up, Ann Pritchett, who I know Ann. Hi, Ann, if you're watching this later. Ann said, "I find it shameful that whole neighborhoods were torn down and allowed to sit there and rot for 40 years before the road was even started. So it's just what we were talking about. So that's what Ann felt, and I couldn't agree more. That's a kind of a sad thing that happened.
Yeah.
And you had one that you wanted to
yeah, it was
bring up?
two here. Patrick Lamb, he said, they called it the highway to nowhere for years when it ended at 75th Street. So it used to end at 75th Street. And then ended up putting some stoplights instead of bridges to keep costs down. Mayor Cleaver was instrumental in getting it finished. It is an awesome way to get downtown from South KC. We used to have to go way west to I-35 or drive through the city to get there. And it also has a great view of downtown approach from the south. I thought that was interesting, the highway to nowhere part.
Yeah, I just also find it interesting I agree with you, Patrick, if you're watching this at some point. I think that view from 71 Highway as you're getting north, I'd say just north of between 31st and 22nd Street, the view of downtown is outstanding. I mean, it is kind of a cool thing that this highway does have some aesthetic value to it. So I agree with that. I think it is absolutely.
And that was also part of that compromise, was to beautify it so it wasn't just concrete. And that took the cost up, but part of that compromise was to put a lot of landscaping around it because people were concerned about it just being this hunk of concrete.
Yeah, and they do. I mean, a lot of the flowers, and there's, I don't know what the yellow flowers are that we don't even know what time of year, but when I see them on the sides, it's like around 39th, between Cleaver and 39th Street. It's just rows of yellow flowers that I just think is beautiful. I have noticed that. That's interesting. I did not know they
that was
had done
part
that.
of it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna read one more. His is a little long, but he kind of sums a lot of it up. Arthur Benson. I was a lawyer for one of the non-for-profits trying to stop it for reasons of both its racially discriminatory effects and its adverse environmental impact with an adequate EIS.
Environmental impact study.
The non-for-profits decided that at most they could only delay it a year or two and then it would return to its full-fledged freeway. So they compromised with a settlement enforced by a court order. It required streets, stoplights, and slower speeds for the portion that was virtually all black neighborhoods in a bid to keep some connections in those neighborhoods that would have otherwise been completely severed by a traditional freeway. I thought that was
that pretty much sums it up. Yeah, and Arthur, if you're listening, hi. Arthur is one of our historians and civil rights historian, and so when Arthur talks, I know a lot of people listen to Arthur. So I appreciate you coming in and giving us your quick synopsis. I'm sure you could come on and talk with us for hours on this. So I really appreciate you taking the time to give that input. And I agree with that input completely. I want to say Catherine Garfield, she says, I remember before raised off Troost, I remember a lot of land disputes of the whole rows of houses they tore down. I also remember the divide it created. So that's interesting. That gave us, we did another question after these started coming in. I was just interested in to hear what people thought, if it was a dividing line for them. So I did a poll, just ask, between Troost and 71 Highway, which is more of the dividing line. And overwhelmingly, I think we had about 20 people respond to that poll, and there were
majority said 71.
Yeah, but we will say one person, Brandy, if you're watching, Brandy said, she's not actually from here, but she moved here from Seattle. She said that when she went to answer that, it was unanimously, mostly unanimously.
She said she was outvoted.
And she was outvoted, and it's a perceptual thing. And so I think maybe if we had asked the question differently, it may have came out slightly different. If I had just asked, what do you feel is the dividing line, and just ask, see what people come up. That'd be interesting to know what people, because I'm going to tell you, as a residential real estate agent, when I'm working with clients, the dividing line is truce. It still is. It's not. They don't say I don't want to live east of 71 Highway. They say they don't want to live east of Truce. It is changing a bit, but it's still from a perceptual point of view. With the people that I work with in my business, that's what's coming up. And you found at the census information.
Oh yeah, so there's and these, I'll put some links in the show notes. But if you look at some of the census maps, it's still truce.
Yeah.
Like you can literally see. So there was one I was looking at. Black people were looked at or represented as like these blue dots, and white people were represented with these yellow dots, green. Yeah. And I got mixed up. I was like, wait, black people was
Yellow
the blue dots
and
white people was the red dots. But on the maps, it literally showed, and you can look at any city. But so I went around and looked at every city, including Kansas City. I looked at California, Houston, Dallas, Miami, Baltimore, Chicago, St. Louis, a few other cities. But on all the streets that are those long stretches like Truce, those are the dividing lines for some reason, which I'm still learning too. But yeah, it's still Truce.
Yeah.
It's and you can see it. It's like
it
just you can see like red dots, you get to Truce, and then it's like blue dots.
Yeah.
Up and down there. So.
And I think it probably comes down to, well, what is the definition of a dividing line?
So
what are we when we say dividing line? Is it a big highway that just divides the city, or
I
is
think
dividing line?
it's layered.
Right.
I think it's
right.
Physical. The physical condition of the separate sides.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely changes. I think it's economical. Property value, property appraisals change.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those maps showed that property value was lower on this side and higher on this side. And I also think it's perception.
Mm-hmm.
I think what people think about one side of this road or that road, or train tracks or a river or a park, because dividing lines are represented in many different ways. But
right.
yeah, I do think it's economics and perception as well.
Yeah, so that was interesting. That could be a whole nother show.
It could be.
But I think this was a lot of fun. I definitely, some myths got busted for me. I learned, and I hope you all got to learn too. And I think we're at the end.
I think so too.
And this was, I'm Franny Knight.
I'm Damon Patterson.
And this is
the KC Dev Report.
Such a that's equally valuable.